today, it is the exact opposite on some subjects of what they have been taught all their lives. And so I appreciate both men's research in the area. I lean a little more to Burkott, because Burkott freely admits, I quit this idea of writing a book on the early church, what they believed on different things. And it was because when I got to this part, I got so disgusted, I just shoved it, pushed it away, and then it took me like 6 months to calm down and come back to it. But he says the reason that it was such an issue for me is because it directly contradicts what I had been always taught about church history. And so I want to echo his plea that, and a reminder as well, that we're just seeing what that second century church believed and practiced. I remember one of Burkott's lines being, not only were they, some of them, the direct opposite of what I'd always been taught in schools about church history, but they also labeled a lot of my positions as heretical. And he said it was just a little too much, and I thought garbage, and I put it up for 6 months, and then I was like, let's try this again. So we're going to have, as usual in this class, a lot of quotes. And we are going to be breaking down the whole teaching of God on salvation. But we're going to start with Sola Fidelis. So here is Schaeffer. Oh, it's going down. Okay. Find out what order I put things in. This is Francis Schaeffer. How many of you have heard of him? He is supposedly, the end-all, be-all when it comes to church history. One of the most popular scholars in the academic world for such things. And this is what he had to say in what I think is his most famous book. I have it. Twain obviously has it. But he says, after he has described the fall of the Roman Empire and the decline of learning in the West, he says, thanks to the monks, the Bible was preserved along with sections of Greek and Latin classics. Nevertheless, it's this nevertheless that's going to take a nosedive. Nevertheless, the pristine Christianity set forth in the New Testament gradually became distorted. A humanistic element was added. Increasingly, the authority of the church took precedence over the teaching of the Bible, and there was an ever-growing emphasis on salvation as on man's meriting the merit of Christ instead of on Christ's work alone. And then, again, since we're quoting, those are the exact words, whereas even in that, I would have chosen some more relatable, shall we say, language. But basically what he is saying there is that all of this stuff that we have any part to play whatsoever as human beings in salvation is not only totally wrong, it wasn't in the original New Testament. It was slowly added piece by piece over time. And so if you go to many prestigious academic institutions today and you study church history, they'll give you this book. Well, actually, they'll charge you for it, but you'll have the book. And he's the authority, right? And he's telling you that this is what happened. And if you've done much research into the fields of the accuracy of the New Testament, etc., like that, then you have run into this idea many, many times. Because basically, and I don't know how much of this is in the notes, but we'll cover quickly as we go through, because we're doing solo fidelis only today. See what I did there, Monty? But it's really difficult for people that are being told by the authority that this is what happened to accept that that's not what happened. And the lie you run into all the time is that, well, they practiced what we're telling you is God's plan of salvation, which again, as always, is basically Calvinism, which, if you think about it, Calvin was not around in those first few centuries. But they always say it was accurate until the time of Constantine. And when Constantine became the Roman emperor and championed the Christian cause, that all kinds of bad things happened, which is true. But one of the main ones they will always say is they started altering the documents, the original documents, and as time went on, they altered more and more. So let's see if that holds up. This is Burkott. The early Christians believed that works or obedience play an essential role. See, that word essential is key. I often have these discussions with people, and it always comes down to that word essential. But basically they're told that a lot of things Jesus himself says to do are not essential. And the answer to, well, why does Jesus say that, is because, well, after Constantine came to power and championed the cause of Christianity, etc. So they believe that works or obedience play an essential role in our salvation. This is quite a shocking revelation. All right, Clement of Rome, and remember your Faces and Places handout today, please. I will say this. I followed Burkott's lead in this section again because of his lack of objectivity coming from the other side, and yet being able to overcome some things. And in this section, he does something he doesn't usually do, which is to, as best as can be determined by a timeline, put these early church quotes in the chronological order. So Clement is the closest to the apostles, and then it'll be Polycarp, etc. But we will go out, actually, I think, all the way into at least the 3rd century. But we will look at the ones closest in time first. So Clement said, "It is necessary, therefore, that we be prompt in the practice of good works, for he forewarns us, behold, the Lord comes, and his reward is before his face, to render to every man according to his work. Let us therefore earnestly strive to be found in the number of those who wait for him, in order that we may share in his promised reward. But how, beloved ones, shall we do this? By fixing our thoughts on God by faith, by earnestly seeking the things that are pleasing and acceptable to him, by doing the things that are in harmony with his blameless will, and by following the way of truth, casting away from us all unrighteousness and sin." So, little bit of, it does in part depend on you, which of course Sola Fidelis can't have because that faith alone. By the way, in case I forget to say this later, I always try and remind people, the Bible in many places talks about being saved by faith, talks about being saved by grace, and those are also accurate statements. What it never says, except for one exception, of course, is that you're saved by faith alone or by grace alone. And that is a huge detail to notice, because more than one thing can be true. So Polycarp, remember the one who was studied under the Apostle John, he who raised him up from the dead will also raise us up, if we do his will and walk in his commandments and love what he loved, keeping ourselves from all unrighteousness. Justin Martyr, in his first apology that we read so much of in this class, because he did such a logical progression of thought in all his, we have been taught that he accepts only those who imitate the virtues that reside in him. Almost sounds like the Sermon on the Mount. Self-restraint, justice, love of mankind. And so we have received this teaching that if men by their works show them worthy of his design, they are deemed worthy of reigning in company with him, being delivered from corruption and suffering. And then Clement of Alexandria, remember, is a different Clement than Clement of Rome that we started with. He's a little later. And guess where he lived? Alexandria, very good money. The Word, having unveiled the truth, showed to men the summit of salvation, so that either repenting they might be saved, or refusing to obey they might be condemned. This is the proclamation of righteousness. To those who obey, rejoicing. To those who disobey, condemnation. He goes on to say, whoever obtains the truth and distinguishes himself in good works shall gain the prize of everlasting life. Some people correctly and adequately understand the truth of how God provides the necessary power, but attaching slight importance to the works, and notice this next phrase, that lead to salvation. They fail to make the necessary preparation for obtaining the objects of their hope. So they hope for heaven, but they don't believe they have to do anything in order to receive heaven, so they don't. Origen. Hugh's got my nice timer going, so I'm watching that, guys. The soul will be rewarded according to what it deserves, being destined to obtain either an inheritance of eternal life and blessedness, if its actions shall have procured this for it, or to be delivered up to eternal fire and punishments, if the guilt of its crime should have brought it down to this. And again, because we're obviously getting a heavy dose in a specific area in these quotes, they say these things while at the same time they say we're saved by God's grace alone. We're saved by God's grace. We're saved by God's faith. But they also recognize that there's something we have to do. So let's look at Hippolytus. The Gentiles, by faith in Christ, prepare for themselves eternal life through good works. See how you get a mixture of both in that one? Again, Jesus, in administering the righteous judgment of the Father to all, assigns to each what is righteous according to his works. Justification will be seen in the wording to each that which is just. To those who have done well, they will be justly assigned eternal happiness. The lover of wickedness will be assigned eternal punishment. But the righteous will remember only the righteous deeds by which they reach the heavenly kingdom. So this is that concept I talked about a little bit last Sunday in the sermon, that I don't take credit for any part of my salvation. I just simply recognize that in order to receive it, there was something I had to do. So I'm trying to remember what all I put in here slide was. If, in so many different analogies, I read a new one recently, same type, but I thought, hey, maybe I'll share that in a different analogy might help some people or help you communicate it to others. So, the king of a mighty empire tells his son to go out to the royal orchard and pick him a basket of apples. The son, knowing absolutely nothing about what his father is thinking except that his father has asked him to go pick some apples, goes and picks some apples and gives the basket to his father, the king of this mighty empire. And the king then promptly gives his son half of the empire. Did the son earn half the empire? Do you think the father intended to give half the empire to him if he brought him rotten apples, or if he said, forget you, Dad, I got to go hang with my friends? Now, so, both things were true, right? He didn't earn half of the empire, but he wouldn't have received half the empire if he hadn't picked a basket full of apples. All right, this is Lactantius. Why then did he make men frail and mortal, so that he might set before man virtue, that is, endurance of evils and labors, by which he might be able to gain the reward of immortality? For since man consists of two parts, body and soul, of which the one is earthly, the other heavenly, two lives have been assigned to the man. The first, which is appointed for the body, is transitory. The other, which belongs to the soul, is everlasting. We received the first at our birth. That pertains to the body. We attain to the latter by striving, that immortality might not be available to man without some difficulties. For this reason he has given us the present life, that we may either lose the true and eternal life by our sins, or win it by our virtue. So, and I just feel the need to keep saying again that they also said, hey, we're saved by grace, by God's grace. We're saved by God's faith, because both things can be true. The part I'm trying to remember, you remember when I've talked in the past about false dichotomies? That being a teaching that says, if you believe this, then this is true of you. And I always use the political example that we hear nonstop in our nonstop political seasons these days. That being that, are you supporting my candidacy, or do you hate America? Are you supporting my candidacy, or do you not love your fellow man? Those are false dichotomies. I may choose not to support his or her candidacy and still love America and still love my fellow man. See? Politics runs on that, and bad doctrine runs on the same thing. So never tell people when they quote a verse or show you a verse that says we're saved by grace or by faith that we're not, because then you're doing the same thing they're doing from the other side. Instead, say, yes, I believe that 100%. I also believe that everything God says is true. And he also says this, then this, and this, and this, and that's so. In fact, every early Christian writer who discussed the subject of salvation expressed this same view. That's a very strong statement, especially from an academic scholar, because they don't like to make sweeping, dramatic statements that then someone could come back and say, "Hey, I found this guy." You know. So in other words, he's convinced that in the early church, no one thought as is taught today in general. Does this mean? Hey, here we go. I did put some good in here. Does this mean that they believed Christians earned their salvation by works? No. They recognized and emphasized the fact that faith is absolutely essential for salvation, and that without God's grace, nobody can be saved. That's wording I use sometimes with people who've been taught these type of things as always being what the church believed and practiced. I like to acknowledge that what they're pointing to is also is essential, you know, and that can help lower their defenses a little bit so that they can listen with a little more objectivity. But you have to say, I believe grace is essential. I also believe that repenting, confessing, baptizing, and living as a disciple are essential. So here's Clement to Rome again, and remember when we're on the Rome Clement, we're very close in time. We are not justified by ourselves, nor by our own wisdom, understanding, godliness, or works done in holiness of heart. You see that balance between his quote earlier and this quote? And these are in the same pieces. You know, it's like listening to a whole sermon. But by that faith, through which Almighty God has justified all men since the beginning. Lots of things there, but we're actually right on schedule, so we're just going to keep it. Polycarp. Many desire to enter into this joy, knowing that, and you see the quotation marks, by grace you are saved, not of works, but by the will of God through Jesus Christ. That's absolutely true. Yeah. But it's also true that if you want half the empire or a room in that mansion, or Gene, the whole mansion. I've already got you down, whole mansion. Then you got to go pick some apples. No?
I'm trying to follow all this.
I know.
It's hard.
It's hard for me too.
Because I consider myself pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. But, you know, what about in James where he says, like the second chapter, where he says, you're justified by works, not by faith. So how does that fit into all this?
You remember earlier when I said it never says faith alone?
Right. I know.
With one exception.
Yeah.
James is that one exception. But when he makes that exception, he says you can't be saved by faith alone. So actually the only time the New Testament ever uses that phrase is to make sure you understand you can't do it. But
works is essential.
it's the same thing. But do remember, see, it's so hard to encompass everything into a brief period of time. Don't forget that as long as you have followed the plan of salvation and are striving now to live as his disciple with Jesus as your Lord, we do have that confidence, security in Jesus' blood continuing to wipe away our sins. Do you see how it's always a matter of balance? That's why I always harp on balance, because it doesn't matter what the issue or anything else, people run way over here, so then there's an uber hyper response that runs way over here, and so then the next person runs way back, and and it gets very confusing.
Yeah, I mean, he says by grace you're saved, not by works.
Yeah.
Kind of like
More than one thing can be true.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about, these guys all talking about works. How about giving us a definition of what they're talking about when they're talking about works?
They're talking, now that is a good point because often we use it slightly differently. When they talk about works, they're talking about anything that man has to do. So anything that is our responsibility versus God's grace, which is all His. Yeah. Does that help any? He's not agreeing. I don't know. I'll let it ruminate back there and see if I come up with anything. So here's Justin again. Our suffering in crucified Christ was not cursed by the law, but rather He made it manifest that He alone would save those who do not depart from His faith. So yeah, He alone is doing something, but if you depart from His faith, Dwayne, what happens? Yeah, it's not good. So as the blood of the Passover, and again, all the teaching tools that God has given us throughout history, and we do not learn. As the blood of the Passover saved those who were in Egypt, so also the blood of Christ will deliver from death those who have believed. So when they cooked the lamb and they took the blood and put it on their door frames, their lintels, did they earn not having to pay the price for their own sins? They did earn it? No, they didn't. It's just like the apples. So more than one thing can be true. But we are so... I don't remember when I first discovered false dichotomies. Actually, I do. I just don't remember the time. I was actually watching somebody on TV on a talk show when I was a kid. I don't know. But they were explaining about false dichotomies. And I was like, I believe I understand that. I know. I see people doing those type of things. So, same thing. Here's Clement, this time of Alexandria, because we're getting about into the middle again. It follows that there is one unchangeable gift of salvation given by one God through one Lord, benefiting in many ways. Abraham was not justified by works, but by faith. Therefore, even if they do good works now, it is no advantage to them after death if they do not have faith. So again, keep in mind that word essential. What he's basically saying there in our version of English is that, hey, faith is essential to salvation. It's just not all you have to do. And I apologize for the animation on the next slide. I'm not really sure. I wrote these late last night thinking my wife would drive to services today and I would study what I'd written, but I didn't get to. But I actually took like 15 minutes. I'm confessing my own PowerPoint lack of skills. Trying to fix this one, and I couldn't figure out how I did it to start with, and I figured, hey, it'll look cool, right? So everyone just pretend it looks really cool. But here it is, you see, this is the principle of false dichotomies. Are faith and works mutually exclusive? Does it have to be only of works? Does it have in 21, which I think we're pretty familiar with? Not everyone who says to me, Lord, 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 will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. And by the way, because I'm pretty sure I didn't put this one in here, Burkott tells of a time when he is lecturing on the early Christians on this subject. And Nona, he gets a response similar to yours, not exactly equal, but similar to yours, where a lady says, well, it sounds to me like they didn't know what to believe. And it sounds to me like they didn't read their Bible if they believed the work stuff. And so I wanted to be sure and say this morning. It is a accepted fact, at least, among Christian scholars and non-Christian scholars, that if we didn't have any of the manuscripts that we have, if we didn't have any, the entire thing could be pieced together by the quotes from these early church writers. There's no part of the New Testament you don't find quoted somewhere, sometime, and most of it many times, many places. And I said all that to say, so don't think that they don't know what they believe and that they don't read their Bible or know what their Bible says, because they did. Here's 24:13. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. I've also got a section in here I want to say, always saved, but I probably won't get to that until after Monty spells us for a while. But this is the same thing as Revelation 2:10 and other places. You know, be faithful unto death, unto the point of even dying. John 5:28-29, which we covered a while back in Life of Christ. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment. Larry, your job has been taken away by a machine. Your job's been taken away by a machine.
No, I know.
Well, so sounds there like you're talking one about a resurrection in which everybody gets judged at the same time, but more to our current point, that their works had something to do with whether or not they receive eternal life. Revelation 22:12-13. Behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to render to every man according to what he has done. That's Jesus again. 1 Timothy 4:16. Pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. Persevere in these things, for as you do this, you will ensure salvation both for yourself and for those who hear you. I've only got 1 minute, but I got to say this. The saddest thing that I have seen over and over in my own path of discipleship is people who have been loyal Christians for decade after decade, and then they just get worn out. They get worn out on an emotional level by more and more loved ones who have not done what they know the Bible says you need to do to be saved. You know, they get just flat out tired of arguing. My brothers always said the reason why I'm still alive instead of having been murdered the way they would have been had they talked to my father the way I did is because my dad was old by the time I came along and he didn't have the energy left. You know, those are huge victories for Satan when we go for long periods of our life and then in the end we turn away. So, last but not least, salvation begins and ends with grace. But in the middle is man's faithful and obedient response. I appreciate your attention this morning. And again, Q is accepted.